Okay, welcome back for our final panel for our second day of Capitol Hill Ocean Week. Again, if I could invite folks in the coffee lounge to migrate back using words that seem to resonate with Senator Begich earlier. I think everything in ocean related needs to have some kind of migratory pattern, including the folks working on the issues. Our final session today will look at what local communities are doing to address global solutions. And as we all know, act locally, think globally. This panel will take that message to heart. To introduce some of the topics that our panel will address, I'm pleased to introduce Sylvia Hayes, the First Lady of Oregon. Sylvia has 23 years of professional experience in sustainable energy, economic development, green jobs, green buildings, and sustainable forestry and agriculture. She's the founder and CEO of 3E Strategies, a clean economy consulting firm. And in case you would like to guess what the 3 E's stand for, I'll tell you straight away: ecology, economy, and equity. And I'll leave it to Sylvia to tie those three things together. Sylvia co-chaired the Oregon Renewable Energy Working Group, and she was honored as a top 50 leader in Oregon by Oregon Business Magazine. As First Lady of Oregon, she's policy advisor to the governor on issues of clean energy and economic development, and she's a regular contributor to Grist and the Huffington Post. Sylvia and Governor Kitzhaber have worked hard to make healthy oceans a priority in Oregon. Many of us in the room are familiar with the work that both of them have been doing on behalf of not just the ocean and coast, but on the salmon that really is an icon and so important to the region. And so with that, let me invite Sylvia to the podium.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am impressed that this many of you made it back in from the sunshine at this point in the afternoon. I'm really happy to be here. I am a lifelong environmentalist, but I will say that of all the pressing environmental issues facing our planet today, the oceans are the ones that are the issue that I have the most concern about. It's the meeting point of so many pressures, as you all know: overfishing, acidification, sea level rise, marine debris. Oregon has some pretty interesting recent experience in how local communities are being affected by global issues, the topic of our panel. And I'm delighted that we have a couple of distinguished Oregonians on our panel today to go into more detail, but I want to give just a couple of highlights on these issues. So for one, our coastal communities are dealing with debris now from the Japanese tsunami that is making its way across the Pacific Ocean to our west coast beaches. The most sensational was a 165-ton, 66-foot long, 19-foot wide dock that landed on the beach out near Newport. And that local community had to deal with everything from concern about spread of potential exotic species to the eventual sawing and busting apart and removal of this dock. And kind of surprisingly, they also had to deal with public safety and traffic and crowd management because of the numbers of people flocking to see the Japanese dock from all over the place. And in the interesting sort of conundrum between environmental protection and economic development, one of the local elected officials actually launched a little campaign to see if they could keep the dock there because it had become such a tourist draw. And then amazingly, just a few months ago, a tsunami-related wrecked boat wound up landing in Washington State, and in it was a still live beakfish that had made it all the way from Japan, and that critter is now living at the Seaside Aquarium in Oregon. Pretty interesting stuff, and I think the fact that our Pacific Northwest communities are dealing with the implications of a tsunami event that took place on the other side of the world truly does make the point that was stated earlier: our oceans connect us all. There's no more clear example of that than the tsunami debris, and I think we're going to hear some more about that. Another really serious issue affecting coastal communities in Oregon and Washington is ocean acidification. And this issue actually was a game changer for me. I have actually decided to apply some of my professional portfolio to the issue of acidification. It's an enormous problem. I have a feeling about it like I did 16, 18 years ago about climate change in general. It's going to be with us for decades, but it's come home to roost right now. And many of you may know that in general, the oceans have increased acidity by about 30% since the Industrial Revolution. Ironically, our relatively progressive west coast of the US is the canary in the coal mine on this issue. We actually, due to a steep continental shelf and our unique system of currents, older, deeper water surfaces off the west coast of the United States and up into Canada, and that older water has had a chance to absorb relatively higher amounts of carbon, which means we are unusually acidic. So much so, in fact, that at times in certain areas we're already to the point where the larvae of shellfish, oysters, mussels, can't survive it. They can't grow the shells. And this is already hitting our multi-million-dollar regional shellfish industry. We've had folks, I'm sure many of you know, abandon the region and move operations into less acidic waters. The truth is, unless we dramatically reduce carbon emissions, we are going to be facing increasingly acidic oceans all over the planet, and this will cause severe damage not only to shellfish and to coral reefs, but potentially to the entire marine food web. Coastal communities in the Northwest really are, again, kind of the canary in the coal mine. We're the first to have to deal with this, and because acidity is on the rise all around the world, how we handle that, how these local communities and these states handle that is going to have implications way beyond our jurisdictions. And I just want to say that while I think it's crucial that we take specific policy actions on issues such as acidification and marine debris and overfishing, the real solution lies in transforming our economic model so that we are more accurately measuring the negative impacts on our environmental and marine resources and the damages to our oceans and coastal communities, which currently much of that is externalized in our current calculations, and also so that we're more accurately capturing the value of ecosystem services like coastal watersheds and the water retention that brings, and the storm protection that comes from healthy barrier islands and coastal wetlands. A critical piece of this, I believe. Development of those new economic models would not only enable us to make more accurate decisions in how we manage ocean and coastal resources, but it also provides a whole series of new economic opportunities for coastal communities, many of whom, certainly in our neck of the woods up in the West Coast, are struggling mightily right now under the status quo economic model. And I don't have time, unfortunately, to talk today about what this new economy might look like. That's the absolute center focus of my work. But I do want to tell you that there is tremendous momentum around this. We have many, many local communities, states, even countries now who are actively working and beginning to work much more collaboratively on Capitalism 4.0. Coastal communities are really engaged. In fact, that last panel kind of inspired me, and I changed my speech a little bit in a minute related to that. But we also have a couple of great examples in Oregon of coastal communities that are reinventing economically. So Port Orford is a great example. We've got some representation here. They're a community who did not want to lose their traditional livelihood as a fishing-dependent community. They went forward with putting in place Oregon's very first marine reserve and have launched a whole series of sustainable seafood products. Newport, another Oregon community, really facing difficult economic times, but they decided, nope, we are not going to be a gambling casino town. That was the decision before them. And instead, they put their foot down, they made a difficult decision, and decided to invest in sustainable fisheries, their working waterfront, and the development of a really robust and world-class marine science and research industry. And again, many of the speakers that we heard in the last panel were other examples of coastal communities and jurisdictions that were really starting to rebuild their economy based on a more environmentally sound model. And I just want to plant a seed with you all. Ever since the Great Recession, all of the emphasis has been on economic recovery. And I think that's the wrong goal. Recovery has a sense of going back, of returning to the way things were. But when you look at what's been happening with our environment and many of our social conditions, it wasn't working so well, even before the recession. I think a much better goal is economic reinvention, really reinventing our economic model. That's exactly what was talked about in that last panel. And if you think that it's daunting to take on the entire economic model, I just want to point out the economy is not the Atlantic Ocean. It is not the blue whale. It's not a force of nature or an act of God. It's a human-made construct. We invented it, which means we can reinvent it, and actually we have done so over and over and over again. I would argue that making the transition to an economy that improves community prosperity while also being environmentally restorative is the single greatest challenge and opportunity of our generations. You know, at the state and federal level, a lot of the policy focus at this point is on things like education reform, healthcare reform, and yes, many, perhaps most of our key systems need to be transformed at this point. However, if we don't seriously deal with protection of our life support systems, if we don't really take on issues like climate and acidification and protection of our ocean resources, all of those other efforts are like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Confucius once said, we're so busy caught up doing the urgent, we fail to do the important. And I think this is the time to do the important. And the work that you all do, there is nothing more important than that really to the overall sustainability of our species and so many other species on this planet. And I'm just delighted to be here. I cannot wait to hear from our panelists, and I really appreciate this conference and all of the efforts that have gone into making it happen. Thank you.
So thank you, Sylvia. That was very inspiring and also very provocative. I think to challenge all of us to fulfill that vision is really important. So thank you. To begin the discussion, I'd like to introduce the moderator of this panel, Brooke Smith. Brooke is one of the Oregonians on the panel, referred to by Sylvia. She is currently the executive director of Compass, a nonprofit helping scientists find their own voices and to help their scientific results find their audience in the public and in Capitol Hill. Her career focuses on being a practitioner of science communications, a sustainability leader, and a nonprofit executive. And I will note that one of the co-founders of Compass was honored last night by the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation as its Lifetime Achievement Awardee, Dr. Jane Lubchenco. So we're particularly happy to have Brooke with us this afternoon. Brooke also holds a courtesy faculty appointment at Oregon State University, serves on the National Board of Directors of the Surfrider Foundation, and is currently serving as a member of the National Academy's Roundtable on Public Interfaces of Life Sciences. So thank you very much. Before I turn it over to Brooke, let me say for our volunteers with question cards, if you guys can raise your hands and make sure, thank you. And when you guys bring your cards, give them to either end of the panel. These guys are going to work cooperatively with a chain of custody right here with the question cards and pass them up to Brooke, who will work with them. So thank you, Brooke.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Jason. And thanks to Sylvia, too. I have to say that being an Oregonian is a really great thing for many, many reasons. And one of them now includes that someone like Sylvia Hayes gets to be our First Lady. She was the perfect person to introduce this panel. She thinks big and systematically about really important issues like energy and environment. But in her role as First Lady, too, really connects with the people and gets into local communities and sees how those things really boil down into what people are doing in their daily lives. So thanks for Sylvia for being here and for being such a champion for all of these things. Before I get started introducing the panel, I want to just take a moment to thank the National Marine Sanctuaries Foundation And especially for who in the room went to prom last night? Most people. Did you guys have a good time? Yeah. Did you enjoy the amazing dinner, which was very carefully sourced from some amazing sustainable seafood options? So Jeb, is Jeb here? Is Mr. CHOW in the room still? I want to thank Jeb for what he did for the evening last night in creating a big, great event, especially the seafood options. But with that in mind, while there's a lot of great choices that have been made at CHOW this week, our panel would really like to point out the plastic water bottle problem that exists at the front of the room for everybody's panels, and plead with the organizers next year to maybe bring some glasses or some reusable bottles. It's directly related to what we're going to talk about during our panel today. So I'm going to get right in. Do I need to do something to start some slides? Great. Okay, so our panel is connecting local issues to the global environment. And I'm just going to say a few words, and then we're going to hear from our panelists for just a few minutes. And we truly, really are going to have the majority of this session be conversation, discussion, and questions from you all. So I just want to just frame the conversation really quickly. Our panel talked on the phone a few times before we got here, and the first things we talked about is what we don't want our panel to do. The first things we said is we don't want this to be a random collection of stories from random places that don't add up to anything. And we also don't want this panel to be about how important local action is on issues. In our opinion, we feel like that's something that we all know and appreciate. And so we want to get past that and move the conversation into what does that mean and what do we do with it? So to set the stage, we all know that there are a lot of global drivers out there that are adversely affecting things, impacting things, changing things, whether positively or negatively. To set the stage, of course, the elephant in the room always is increasing CO2 in the atmosphere. I feel like often in conversations like this, that tends to be an aside, and after we describe what the issues are, we say, and then there's climate change, and we'll have to think about that. When we listen to what everyone on the stage is working on, we see that increasing CO2 in the atmosphere is a major driver of everything that they're doing, and so we're gonna include this as a major focus of our discussions today. Climate change is happening, it's real, and it's being felt in local communities, and it's big, it's global. And then there are consumer choices and a changing behavior and a changing society. And this is related to some of the things some of our panelists will talk about today. We are becoming an increasingly plastic culture. And that's happening all over the world. And that, again, is felt and seen in local communities. So there's all kinds of things happening at the global level. I'm not going to go into them all. Most of you know them all and could come up here and give an hour presentation about each of them. But what we really want to then focus on is, yes, we know there's local action, there's local things happening, people on the ground, in their beaches, in their coastal towns, tackling some of these challenges that are happening from these global drivers. But our big question here today is, what do all these local things add up to? Are they making a global impact? Can they be doing more to make a global impact? Is there a way we can be connecting them to each other or doing more to invest in them addressing the global drivers that we're feeling in these local communities? So we're gonna go through and hear from each of our distinguished panelists. They're each working on very specific things that are being felt and seen and dealt with at the local level, but they're being caused and driven by global issues. So we're going to go through right now, and what I've asked each panelist to do is to talk to you guys about the tension that they feel between what's happening at the local level and the global drivers or global solutions that we need to think about. And that's what we're hoping that our conversation can focus on today, is that local-global connection back up to the global level. So first we have Julia Roberson from the Ocean Conservancy. She works on ocean acidification. I'm going to give the primer for her, which I think many of you know, and Sylvia talked about earlier too, which is as we see increasing CO2 in the atmosphere, the oceans is absorbing a lot of that. Our oceans are becoming more acidic. That is a global problem. As Sylvia said, we're feeling it in the Pacific Northwest. It's happening there first in an intense way, but it's not driven by what's happening in the Pacific Northwest. The Pacific Northwest is part of it, but there's a lot of other global factors that are contributing to it. And so we're feeling it, as Sylvia said too, in our shellfish industries and our local economies and people who are working in these coastal communities and depending on the resources that are affected by ocean acidification. So I'm going to turn it over to Julia to share her thoughts about this topic and how it relates to what we're discussing here. So I think she's going to come up here to the podium if you want to come on up and share some things with folks. And then we'll hear from everybody else for a few minutes too, and then we'll engage in a discussion about it.
Great, thank you, Brooke, and thanks everyone for being here today and taking the time out of the sunshine to talk about some of these very important issues with us. And I echo all of the thanks to the organizers of Capitol Hill Ocean Week and for the great event last night. So we have heard mention of the problem of ocean acidification, and I'm going to go into a little more detail about this problem. I think there's some statistic that shows that you have to hear things 3 or 4 times before it starts to sink in. So Sylvia, Brooke, and all the other panelists are going to hit some of these points again and again, and I think we can have a good conversation about them all. In 2007, Dr. Thomas Lovejoy called ocean acidification the most profound environmental change he had observed in his entire professional career. And that same year, something strange was happening in Oregon. The oyster larvae that Sylvia, okay, I'm going to put this over here because we've got a little sliding problem going on the podium. The oyster larvae that Sylvia mentioned in the Pacific Northwest, they were dying by the billions at 2 of the 3 big hatcheries in the Pacific Northwest that supply seed for the shellfish operations up and down the West Coast. And hatchery operators, Bill Taylor, Mark Weigert, were stumped. You know, they tried to stop the die-off, they installed pricey filtration and sterilization systems. Nothing was working. At Whiskey Creek in Oregon, they lost 80% of their harvest and came close to declaring bankruptcy. Alan Barton from Whiskey Creek and scientists from Oregon State University started monitoring the pH of the water that they were drawing into their tanks where they were raising the larvae. Sure enough, the oyster die-offs coincided with higher acidity readings. The larvae couldn't build their shells because the water was too acidic. And thanks to these scientists and some quick-thinking folks at Washington Senator Maria Cantwell's office, the Pacific Northwest shellfish industry received funds enabling them to continuously monitor the acidity of the water in their operations. And this allowed them to stay in business. And this is a $272 million industry for Washington State. It employs over 3,200 people. So this was a big deal. When the reading reaches a certain level in these operations, they can turn off the intake pipes, and the oysters can continue growing for the time being. But the hatchery operators in this region are often heard saying that, we have the luxury as an operation, as a closed containment system, to be able to respond to this threat. Unfortunately, nature can't do that. And this is where we really get to the heart of the matter. The ocean is being polluted at an alarming rate. As Brooke said, as our carbon emissions are increasing, they are being absorbed by the ocean. This reduces its pH, turning it more acidic. And I just have to repeat this fact, because I repeat it to myself often, that we are literally changing the chemistry of the ocean as a result of our carbon emissions. And it's not just the chemical change, it's the fact that this change is happening so freaking fast that, the organisms in the ocean have not seen anything like it in millions of years. And I think freaking fast is indeed the scientific term that people are using. So we've seen that shell-building animals are having trouble making their shells. Things that eat shell-building animals, salmon, whales, us, I would put us in that category, people, are going to find themselves in trouble. And so with the story of oysters, these are local communities growing shellfish, and they are on the front lines of this global problem. In the rural counties of Washington and Oregon State, where some of these businesses are based, they are the area's largest employers. And I like to say that ocean acidification is about people, because it's people being impacted, it's people who are going to solve the problem, and it's people on the front lines in these local communities who are going to bring attention to this problem in places like Washington, D.C. Like Brooke said, it's not emissions from Washington or Oregon that are driving this drastic change, and there's some local drivers of acidification that we'll talk about later. It's the cumulative impact of our footprint. But where do you even start with something that big and that systemic? And states aren't waiting, they can't wait at this point for the politics, internationally and nationally to align. They're taking action now. Oregon and Washington are two great examples. They've got some vehicles for change and for addressing this problem that I think we're going to talk about later on in the panel. And it's a great example of states taking action, and it's a good model for other states who are going to be dealing with this problem in the future. And I think we as a community really need to be enabling and supporting that local action on this issue, because by doing so, we are building capacity and understanding of the need to reduce carbon emissions. And to take these steps locally and nationally, we need funding to support scientist work so that local policy responses are informed by the best available science. Washington, Oregon, California are making great progress on this front, and other states are looking at their own options for action. And so that's ultimately what I hope this panel can leave you with, not terribly depressed or overwhelmed, but that we can't wait and we have to act, and that can start locally and scale up. So with that, I will turn it over back to Brooke. You're welcome.
All right, so the next thing that we'll just have a quick primer on as it relates to our discussions is marine debris. Brianna Goodwin from, let me get this right, the Oregon Marine Debris Team, all right, of which SOLVE is part of, which it says up here. And you can read everyone's bios, of course, in your background packet. So Brianna works on this issue, and as I talked about before, we're seeing an increasingly plastic society. And as Sylvia talked about, she made it so I don't have to give any opening remarks. We're seeing tsunami debris showing up in Oregon. A lot of that is plastic, and so we're seeing the results of consumption in another part of the world on our shores in Oregon and in our backyards. So Brianna's going to come up and talk about her observations of this and the tension that she feels with the local and global issues. Oh, you're going to sit.
I'm going to stay seated. I'm representing the Oregon Marine Debris Team, and that's a partnership of 4 nonprofits and Oregon Sea Grant, which is an educational institution that partners with NOAA. And as a partnership, we are non-political. However, 2 of our members are. You might recognize Surfrider Foundation and Oregon-based Coast Watch. So I just give you that caveat for the discussions we'll be having later. We've been talking about how the oceans connect us, but I want to move inland more and talk about how watersheds connect us. We have talked about the water bottles, but a water bottle or a plastic bag that is tumbling through the streets of southern Illinois are going to make it potentially into the Mississippi River and down into the Gulf. And these watersheds are connecting us, and scientists estimate that 60 to 80% of marine debris originates on land. So this is not a coastal communities issue. This is a global issue. Everyone is contributing to this issue with their consumer choices, with waste management. And the disaster, as Sylvia said, which was a really great introduction to this, the disaster in Japan is a very highly visible example of just how connected we are, and also how little we understand about how marine debris is moving through the ocean. We weren't expecting to see any debris on the West Coast from that disaster until the beginning of this year. Well, surprise, beginning of June, we have a huge dock sitting on our beach. So we've been learning a lot. In Oregon, that is what drove our partnership to form, was tsunami debris and our volunteers, who are existing volunteers and new volunteers, saying, how are we protecting our beaches? What are we going to do about this? And so it's been very grassroots. It's driven by volunteers. In fact, the majority of our state's response plan to tsunami debris is volunteer-based. It's our partnership, the Marine Debris Team, organizing volunteers, working closely with Oregon State Parks, because we're lucky to be one of only 3 states where all of our beaches are public and part of our Oregon State Park system. So it's been very grassroots. We're working on a community level to prepare them to respond to marine debris on an as-needed basis. So when we do get these events of a lot of debris washing up, which we have been seeing over the past year or so, they're ready to run out and clean up their beaches. And then connecting that across the coast, and then taking it up to state level and international. We're talking about this as a global issue, we've been working out of this disaster. We've been working with the Japanese government and Japanese non-governmental organizations and researchers on addressing this issue of marine debris. And so we're all trying to take the focus from tsunami debris and really focus on marine debris, because we've been seeing debris from the entire Pacific Rim for many, many years. This is nothing new, and with tsunami debris, we're seeing a lot of the same debris that we had been seeing before. Of course, you know, the boats and docks are new. We're not used to seeing those. But luckily, through our relationship with the Ocean Conservancy, through the International Coastal Cleanup, we've been able to make these connections with other Pacific Rim countries and talk about how we can work together. I had the opportunity in March to be part of a U.S. delegation to Japan, where we had a workshop about tsunami debris in Tokyo and Sendai, where they gave us plastic bottles. And my colleague in Alaska said, this is the issue. We see bottles like this all of the time on our beaches. This is what we need to focus on. So that's one of the ways that we're trying to work to address this global issue. And I want to say that as the marine debris team, we're really focused on monitoring because we had no baseline data on marine debris before the influx of tsunami debris, and also cleanup. And so there are, like I said, there are the drivers of consumer choices and waste management. But even if we stopped the input into our oceans, because of how much is in the Pacific Gyre right now, for the next 50 years, it's estimated we would still be cleaning up our beaches, because that's how much mostly plastic is in our ocean right now. And so, of course, there have been challenges in terms of capacity and trying to make those international connections and address this huge issue and include local communities. And I look forward to talking more about that during our discussion.
All right, up next. This is nice. I can just sit here and, yeah. All right, Dr. Becky Goldberg from Pew Charitable Trust. She's going to talk a little bit about ecosystem-based fisheries management. We have this great picture. I hope you guys can see it. And again, lots of things happening in the world that are driving change in the ocean. Water's becoming warmer some places. That changes the composition of things. And so we are literally starting to see a different complexion of fish species in places that we didn't see previously. And that, of course, means that people have to think about managing fisheries different. And that's affecting local communities in terms of what they're fishing for, the economies they're built on, and what's at their dinner table that night. So, Becky, can you share some more and enlighten us, please?
Sure. I don't know about enlighten, Brooke, but anyway, I'm going to stand. We had a debate before this panel about whether we were going to stand to give our presentations or sit, and we were a split group. So some of us are standing. So anyway, I'm Becky Goldberg. I am the director of the Pew Charitable Trust Ocean Science Division, and what we do is develop and support science that informs marine conservation policy. And I'm going to take my few minutes up here today to talk a bit about climate change and some of the implications for fisheries management. And as Brooke mentioned in her introduction, warming ocean temperatures are already leading to globally to poleward shifts in fisheries catch, and that's a trend that's projected to continue. In addition, researchers project that fish size may decrease globally because of changing ocean conditions, such as declining oxygen levels. And the result is going to be both shifts in the locations of species catches and quite possibly reduced catches in some areas. There are already some clear examples of changes in fish distributions and shifting fishing activity. In other words, this isn't just the future, this is now. On the East Coast, for example, the ranges of yellowtail flounder, summer flounder, red hake, and lobster have all notably shifted northward as the centers of their landings by fishermen. As I believe the next speaker will discuss, there have also been some rather startling fish species turning up in numbers in New England. There are significant management consequences of these shifts in fisheries distributions. Some species, fish species in an area are going to lose their suitable habitat, and maintaining populations of these fish may require reducing other non-climate stressors on the fish, including fishing. In other words, it might be tempting as fisheries are moving to get the last ones But that's not really a good strategy for ocean ecosystems or fisheries overall. Rather, it's going to take a more management to keep the fish. On the other hand, there are also going to be some emerging fisheries as species shift into new areas. And management is going to need to be instituted before they're fished. That's another challenge. There are consequences for fisheries science, too. For example, some of the assumptions commonly made in stock assessments just don't hold under climate change. And an upshot is that traditional single-species fisheries management needs to move towards ecosystem-based fisheries management, which is, of course, commonly known as EBFM, that incorporates climate and other important ecosystem attributes. Now, climate isn't the only reason for EBFM, clearly not, but it's really should be an important motivator. Perhaps the best examples of steps that are being taken to achieve this objective, and some are already underway and in fact have been for a while, is the preparation by the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council of an ecosystem considerations appendix that accompanies stock assessments. And of note, in a couple of instances, the council has made or taken management-related measures based on climatic information. So the North Pacific Council is already doing some of these things, and other councils are beginning to look at the issue too. So you might ask, she's been going on, she's been talking generally, what does this have to do with the session's theme of local responses to global challenges? Well, the answer is quite a lot. Although there are market trends in ocean conditions, underlying these trends is considerable local variability. We heard from Julia that acidification is really showing up first, big time, on the Oregon coast, but it's going to affect other areas too, but not necessarily in an even pattern. Similarly, while global oceans are on average warming, the California current ecosystem appears to be cooling. The ocean's a pretty variable place. So in short, developing the appropriate information and managing fisheries in an era of climate change, and I'm including ocean acidification, should be a relatively local endeavor. In the US, of course, this means one that's led by states and regional councils. Simply put, ocean ecosystems are more local than global, and implementation of EBFM has to be scaled to them, especially in the face of global climate change. That said, efforts to implement EBFM taken together are going to make a major difference, or have the potential to make a major difference to the overall health of fisheries in the oceans. So we have to do the local, but by doing the local, hopefully it'll add up to something more global. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Becky. All right, so now we're going to move into a kind of place-based look at all of these issues. And so we have John Weber here from the Northeast Regional Ocean Council. And to kind of put his work into context here, it relates to a lot of things we've already been talking about. John will tell you that the world is changing around him very quickly, and they're seeing this in New England and seeing this off the coast of Massachusetts. There are fish species that are there that have never been there before, and there's a whole bunch of new emerging uses that are coming up quickly and being implemented really fast. And so as the world changes really quickly around one, what they're doing in New England is thinking spatially about things and bringing communities together to think about how all these things fit together and what that means for management. So it's a very local way to think about managing an area and helping the folks in that area in response to a lot of global things going on. John.
Thank you, Brooke. Appreciate this, and echo all my thanks also to Jeb, who I just saw a minute ago, and everybody else who helped put this panel together. I think Brooke and some of the other introductory remarks have really set our discussion this afternoon up very well. In the phone calls leading up to this, we were asked to be a bit provocative, so I'll bite. Are there any Yankees fans in the room? And if so, really, really sorry about the tough weekend you had last weekend.
No
really
one's
sorry.
admitting it.
Really, really sorry about that. Go Red Sox and go Bruins tonight. And don't worry, I'm not going to, give any of the other classic park the car. I'm not going to talk about, parking the car in any yard. I don't even know what that means. Clearly, as anybody knows, but it's worth taking a minute to step back. You don't have to go very far in New England, and we've heard from other places. And certainly we all know this, but it's worth reminding us of this, to find the reminders of how important our coasts and oceans really truly are and have been culturally. When you cross the border into Maine, one of the first things you'll see on the interstate there is an enormous lobster painted on the side of a big natural gas propane storage tank. That's kind of an interesting juxtaposition of thinking about ocean planning in the future, but whatever. Rhode Island calls itself the ocean state. There's a golden cod hanging in the Massachusetts State House. These things have been there for a long time. They are representing the fact that the coasts and the ocean and its resources are vital to our economy and our community, in the past, now, and in the future. So when we talk about regional ocean planning, as Brooke said, a lot of what we're talking about is to understand that vitality. And so in order to really do that, you have to go talk to people, and you have to meet them in their house, in their pub, on their boat, to really understand how that vitality is manifesting itself at sea, in that part of the community, and also on land. So it makes sense for us as we're doing our work, we have to think locally. But as this map shows here, which is a map of just Massachusetts, in our neck of the woods, we also have to think broader than that, because we all recognize that the way the Gulf of Maine works is that one thing that happens in the Gulf of Maine, off the coast of Maine, off the coast of Nova Scotia, could potentially affect what's happening in a different state, in a different community. And that's partly sort of no duh type of stuff. The ecosystem doesn't care. Fish don't care about our kind of quaint and interesting, very important jurisdictional boundaries. So as a result, offshore Massachusetts in this map, and some of the blue lines, you can see that there are actually where fishing vessels go. Some of that, if you take a look at that, you would see that in certain areas, you could have a boat working a particular area off the coast of Massachusetts. That boat could be from 4 or 5 different states. That boat could be from any one of a number of dozens of different harbors. So my point is, with all of that, that's how things work out there, depending on what exactly you're talking about. So you have to, while you're thinking locally, you have to be thinking about different scales, depending on what it is that you're talking about. You brought that up, I thought, really well with your conversations about marine debris. Similar conversation that you were just starting us off on with fisheries-based management. We all know this. So my premise is that we absolutely need to be working locally for a couple of other reasons that I'll get into in a minute. But we really, in 1 minute, one very fast minute, but we really need to be working on different scales too. That's important to us because we need to be increasingly mindful of the importance of all of this to our future. Recent events, obviously, are really starting to raise some questions about that. Just 2 in our neck of the woods. As Becky mentioned a minute ago, in southern New England, we are starting to see fish species we have never seen before. I'm not going to be here to debate whether or not blue crab, which are showing up where we've never seen them before, are better to eat than lobster. And that's not the point. The point is it's happening, it's real. Superstorm Sandy is another sort of way that some of these big global changes seem to be impacting at a local level. Those are just 2 of the more headline-grabbing examples. There are plenty of others. We've heard about some of them on the panel today. One last point that I want to make is that I think one of the interesting things that is coming through on some of these stories is that what often happens at a local level is it's at that level where the effects of some of these global changes are really being dealt with. What is not possibly, or perhaps being as completely dealt with as it needs to, is of course some of the causal forcing mechanisms behind that. And I think that's a very important point. So my concluding point is that absolutely we need to be working at a local level, because it is at a local level where responses to these changes need to happen. It is also where it is within the realm of the possible, I would suggest right now, to really be operating. While we're waiting for some of these other efforts at a broader national, international level to come along, we need to be operating locally. And I do hope that we have some time to think about sort of this cause and effect part of this as well.
All right, we have one more person about this place-based piece, and Bose, you're last, and you're going to kind of get the shaft because we really need to get into some conversation. So just really quickly, this is Bose Hancock from the Nature Conservancy, and he works on community-based habitat management. And I'm not even going to show my pictures. He works on coral. Look, and they restore them in communities, and it's really great. And I'm going to ask you, Bose, to, in 1 minute, tell us about the tension between local efforts when working on habitat restoration and the challenges in a global context.
I've been reduced from 1 minute to 3.
Go.
Okay. Well, first off, the Nature Conservancy's interest in the coastal marine environment is actually in maintaining a healthy ecosystem. So restoration is actually the part of that that intersects with that local place-based activity, in that, as we've heard right from the plenary through many of the discussions, we're doing a pretty bad job of actually looking after the habitats that contribute so constructively to ecosystem function, and also contribute an enormous amount to the benefits that we as communities expect to be gaining from the ocean. So the habitat is a really critical part of ecosystem function and the way we actually interact with the ocean. We're doing a pretty poor job of looking after it. TNC deals with a wide range of habitats in terms of restoration. Shellfish and coral are where I'll keep my comments. They're the ones that have been introduced. And it's actually worth, I think, just very briefly pointing out some of the similarities between those two. I mean, coral reef and a shellfish reef, think of an oyster reef, don't necessarily strike you as being the same thing, but they are a large calcium carbonate structure covered with a veneer of living organisms. And that calcium carbonate structure provides the habitat that produces things like the shelter for juvenile fish. It's the veneer of living organisms that actually supports the enormous range of species and the biomass, the abundance of species that are associated with both of those habitats. But those habitats are critical to what we expect from the oceans in terms of benefits such as, I've mentioned fish production. I think we need to be focusing very explicitly on the fish production from some of these habitats. Shoreline protection, fringing coral reefs, fringing oyster reefs have been discussed in previous sessions as being very important to the protection of coastal communities. And if we're thinking more along the lines of perhaps oyster reef, the filtration that is actually one of the major functions of those oyster reefs is incredibly beneficial to us and our coastal communities, as is the denitrification. Once the organic material has been filtered out of the water column, that then becomes available in the sediments, and those oyster reefs become one of the only mechanisms we have for pumping organically available nitrogen back out of the system as inert gas. So,
In conclusion,
the excitement and the enthusiasm that is generated at the local level through actually working with ecosystems, environments, and making a difference at that local level is the driver. And that's the driver that I think we need to be harnessing to actually make the global difference. And things that are going to make the global difference is actually harnessing that energy to change fisheries paradigms. We have heard fisheries actually described by Sylvia as a global impact. We should not be looking at something like an oyster reef as a supply of oysters. It should be looked at as a supply of fish.
So in conclusion, local communities
The
and their
local
excitement
communities
needs to be
and
harnessed.
the excitement can be harnessed to actually drive the changes in management that we need to see, and actually create the motivation for things like markets that actually finance the amount of restoration we need to see happen.
Thanks both. All right, so we want to hear some questions from you guys, so I hope you'll write some things down and send them up. To get all right, I'll get it started with a question for you all, a two-part question. One is effectively what you're doing climate adaptation, and if it is it the new normal, or is it just a Band-Aid approach? Julia.
I think there is there's clearly an aspect of adapting to what we're facing. You know, we have driven a change. That change is occurring. There is a measure of adaptability there. But I think with the issue that with the issue of ocean acidification, I think it's almost a little bit glib to call it a Band-Aid approach, because some of the work in the regions and some of the responses in the regions where the industry has been impacted, those responses have enabled a business and a community to stay in business and to respond to that threat. And I think crucially, provide a platform for talking about the bigger problem, that one Band-Aid is not going to solve the global problem that some of these coastal communities are facing. So I think yes and no is that answer.
Other thoughts?
Right?
Yeah.
I wanted to offer this thought that at least in fisheries management, we need to do climate adaptation, and it is the new normal. And the reason is simply that no matter what happens with emissions of greenhouse gases, all the models seem to show that there's a lot of momentum built up in climate change. Where we are 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere now, we're going to see climate change for a long time, even if greenhouse gas emissions fall sharply in the immediate future. So we need to deal with it. And if we want to have reasonably healthy oceans, if we want to promote resilient oceans, we've got to adapt.
Yep.
And those habitats are a critical part of some of that adaptation too. We've heard in previous panels, I don't think I have to labour the point about shoreline protection of coastal communities. That is very much a habitat interaction and adaptation to a climate change that we've all acknowledged is continuing. The management of those fisheries and how we actually think about managing resources is something that, as Rebecca's saying, is going to be driven by the fact that climate change is there, but it also needs to be driven from the bottom up. And that is that local education, that local enthusiasm, that local engagement that comes from doing something constructive at the local level.
Related to that, a question just came in that's on that point, which is interesting, and that's, as federal climate change strategy seems unlikely, how can local groups and governments integrate their strategies into something larger and into a larger strategy?
I think one example on the West Coast is the West Coast Governors Alliance and having these regional partnerships. So sometimes we'll have an action that starts on the very local level. It might be a community like Port Orford, but then it's sort of scaling that up, or if it's not scalable, how do you transfer that and how do you work together? Because a lot of the work I do is very community-based, because what works in one coastal community isn't necessarily going to work in the next, but you're all working towards the same goal. So how do you tie the work you're doing together and learn from each other and help each other? And so one way to address that is these regional partnerships.
So I want to have you guys say a little bit more about that, because I think that's at the crux of this discussion and related to another question that somebody asked, which is, since the world is interconnected by the oceans, what actions are being taken to make local communities around the world connect with each other to make sure it's connecting up to a global level? And you touched on it a bit with a regional aspect there.
And if I can chip in there, I think probably the answer that Brianna was giving there is coordination. That level of coordination is really important. It's going to be a joint effort. I would actually like to echo some of the compliments that NOAA's been getting at this particular conference. I think they have done an extraordinarily good job of getting out ahead of the game and actually focusing on some of the coordination that needs to be done.
Do you think that it's NOAA's responsibility?
No, I don't think NOAA actually has the capacity to influence some of the state-based management decisions or local management decisions entirely, but they do have the capacity to guide, and I think the whole marine conservation community needs to be assisting and helping to do that communication. My position is actually involved quite a lot in spreading some of the learning that's being done at a national level through partnerships with NOAA internationally. America is actually quite a long way ahead of the rest of the world in terms of habitat restoration, and part of my position is actually moving that understanding and momentum into other countries. So that coordination, I think, is a really important component of moving from the local to the global. And it's not one particular organisation. I think we all need to be putting our shoulder to that same way.
John?
So I think that's really important because I think that while we're waiting for additional types of federal or international mandates to come down, there are things that can and should be happening now that relate to coordination. Education is another part of this. The other thing I'd point out is that some of this also, maybe shockingly, does not need to be done by government. There are examples, Oregon, as an example we heard earlier, of fishermen getting together and deciding they want to do a sustainable co-op, that type of thing. That is happening also in New England. So I think it's important to recognize the role of government and how important that is. But if that's kind of, we're stalled on that front, there are other fronts to pursue as well outside of government.
So I'd be curious to hear your guys' opinion on what you think the role of the federal government is, given that we are here at Capitol Hill, Oceans Week. Is there a role, and are they playing it? Is there something that you would recommend they do differently to help all these local efforts scale up more?
If I could start, I think one, and I think it is starting to happen, and so credit where credit is due where it is happening. There are, for some of what we're talking about, if you're thinking about fisheries management or other effects in the way ecosystems are changing, there are very basic and fundamental scientific questions that are out there that need to be investigated, that there probably will never be the resources available at a local level to do that at certain scales. Yeah. That is happening. So, some of those very basic help us develop this understanding of what do we know, what don't we know, what might it look like. That is a very key part of this whole equation. And as we've said, credit where credit's due. Some of that is happening. We need more, but it's happening.
And it's not just the science, it's actually just getting the data to do the science and keeping it up to date in an era of global change. And as was emphasized by a panel this morning, one of the critical things is just to maintain some of NOAA's data gathering capabilities.
Absolutely. So I think in terms of what government can do, it is actually maintain the momentum. It's been mentioned several times already today that there is a building momentum, and I feel the same in terms of marine issues, marine restoration, marine conservation. And I think it's incumbent upon the multiple branches of government to recognise the importance of that, and for us to be reminding them constantly of the importance of that, so that the focus is not dropped.
All right, here's another good question on a different topic. You mentioned that the need to fund more and better science research so that policymakers and business leaders can make better decisions. Since businesses have an enormous financial stake in mitigating environmental deterioration, have you, your organizations, or others had any success in achieving private sponsorship of science or your local efforts?
Well, we sponsor science, and we're a private organization, so yes.
I presume the intent here is more from a business perspective, but yeah. Brianna?
So we aren't necessarily doing research, and my previous job was with Solve, and so we're coordinating volunteers to get out and clean the beaches. And so we've had very successful partnerships with a plethora of different businesses. One great example is Wells Fargo, who sponsors our fall event. They also bring out 500 volunteers to help in the community-led efforts throughout the state on that one day to volunteer. That makes up 1/10 of our volunteer force that is out that one day. We work with countless other businesses across multiple sectors as well. So in Oregon, Solve is having a lot of success working with business. Again, it's not the scientific research portion of it, but it's supporting volunteers in community-led environmental projects.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, on a related note, with respect to ocean acidification, some of the monitoring needs and systems that some of these operations have to install can be incredibly expensive. And I think what we've seen recently develop in ocean acidification and in other issues is the idea of technological advancement and innovation and creativity. The X Prize Foundation has launched an Ocean Health Prize to develop cheaper, better, more efficient ocean acidification sensors and monitors. So I think that type of innovation and technological answers is kind of the wave of the future for some of us.
And I would very much like to see, it's something that we are working on. I feel we're at the kind of leading edge of creating private markets to actually fund some of this work. It's got to be a focus. It's got to be something we are doing more of, along with putting dollar values on these services that are provided by the habitats and the ecosystems that we're damaging. But there is a nutrient trading market that may well be beginning in terms of total maximum daily loads for nutrients, for pollutants in coastal waters. And if we can harness those kind of market forces to actually assist with the scale of work that needs to be done, that's where we can actually make a difference.
So with all of the issues facing the coast and its communities, how does a local organization choose which to focus its efforts on? And I want to add an amendment to this question too, which is recognizing that a number of people up here on the panel work on an issue and other people work in a place on multiple issues, and trying to, is one more effective than the other? Do we need both? Is there recommendations you guys have on that score?
I think it's really based on the community needs, so it really depends on where you're living. I used to work in Port Orford, and in Port Orford, our major economic driver is the commercial fishing industry. So the nonprofit I worked at focused on fisheries conservation by working with commercial fishermen on sustainable fisheries efforts. And so that was the community need. There are also other organizations within the community, like Main Streets, and they are addressing things like litter and beautification. And so you kind of, I think it really takes a sort of community needs assessment to see what organizations are there, what does the community see as the need, where is your passion, and where's the capacity that you're going to gain to address those issues.
Yeah, how about you, John, since you work on everything?
Thankfully, no. What was I going to say? So my point with that was going to be, I don't think it actually matters, but what I do think, if you go place-based or if you go issue-based, what I do think matters is that you choose something that within a reasonable amount of time you can produce a concrete result. Because bean counters like that, anybody who's worked with funders knows this, but also because it's hard work. And if after a year you can look back and say, wow, we did a thing, and there it is, and that's wonderful, that's really helpful, because some of this, let's face it, can seem very daunting.
So measurement is important.
It matters.
And actually, Brianna mentioned assessment too. TNC, we're often accused of over-planning. But I do think it needs to be a considered approach. And there are planning efforts to make sure that for any volunteer hour or any dollar spent, you get the maximum amount of benefit. And I think that's probably the point that's been made by both of the previous answers.
All right, I think we have time for about one more question. So I'm going to ask my question. With that in mind, though, a number of you had very specific questions for these folks about marine debris specifically and about restoration specifically. So please come up afterwards and talk to Bose and talk to Brianna and talk to everyone on the panel to learn more about their issue. So my question is, in my personal life, I try really hard to minimize my impact on some of these global drivers. And like many of you probably do as well, I have that moment of, oh my gosh, does this really matter? This is so big and there's so many other people doing this. And when we think about all of these global drivers impacting all of your local issues and what we talked about before, how do you guys reconcile, and what keeps you going and feeling like these problems are so big and they're systemic and it's the entire planet that needs to think about changing, to still feel like what you're doing in your place is adding up to something bigger?
Drink heavily?
Yes, drugs.
Well, if you think about small things. For example, I carry around a reusable straw in my purse and also have reusable utensil. And so if you think about if you're someone who eats out a lot and every single time you eat out you're not taking that straw, think about how many straws you're saving. And then if you guilt your other people sitting at the table with you, how many straws that is. And with any action, think about, your friends are looking at you weird when you pull a straw out of your purse, and then I explain why I'm doing that. And so I think I really try to make those small changes and just be at peace knowing that you're doing at least what you can in your personal life to make those changes. And then by looking like the weirdo at the table and talking to people about your decisions, you're really helping to spread that awareness, and maybe that next person is going to start doing the same thing. And it's really a cumulative effort, and sometimes you do need to just sit down and think about those really small successes because it is such a huge issue.
Well, and I think those are the things that give people hope. I mean, this is when you can actually get your arms around something that you can do today for right now. And I always think about my mother, who now carries seafood wallet cards in her wallet. She hands it out to all of her friends. We've got these southern ladies down in North Carolina who are all about sustainable seafood, and that is empowering to her. And that I've seen it. She has learned more about ocean issues and some of these bigger questions, and it's part of a community and making her and others feeling like they are part of a community and that they can make a difference.
Yeah.
So that's
Right. On the oceans, going back in time, I served for a number of years on USDA's National Organic Standards Board, and so I was very much in a community of people who cared about how food was produced and the environmental consequences of these activities and so on. And when I started my service, there was almost no discussion of seafood in the sustainable food community and the oceans. And I think by people, in part, taking a lot of actions and thinking about what they're doing, it really has helped frame oceans issues as something larger in the public mind. Now, that doesn't mean it solves all our problems. It's just one thing. But it is happening. And I think that when I deal with other issues where I don't work on them, like Brianna, carrying a plastic water bottle, it's a good thing. And it reminds us all that we need to protect the planet.
Bose, John, final
If I could summarise that, it's momentum.
Yeah,
It is
great.
happening. It is happening. There is a change. And that change doesn't come about without us all doing our small part. Please keep it up.
All right. John, can you top that as a final word?
Something about sustainably produced alcohol for the heavy drinking.
I'm sensing a
That's like
theme.
the
Yes. So it's
Organic
obviously very
happening.
close to happy hour. So I don't want to stand between people and their cocktails at this point. Now I want to thank all of our panelists up here, and please do come up and ask questions of folks if you've got specific questions of the issues. And thank you all for doing everything you do, because it adds up to all the stuff that we're talking about with momentum. So thank you, and thanks to everyone here at CHOW.
Thank you.
So thanks everyone for a wonderful discussion. We start tomorrow at 9 a.m. for coffee. Come on in at 8 o'clock. Registration will be open then. See you all tomorrow.